blessed by amazing moderators today, and we're going out with our last plenary session in style with a person who you probably may not recognize his face, but you know his voice. Because if you're like me, you listen every Friday to Science Friday, Talking Nation with Ira Flato. Ira is actually doing his show on Friday live from here in the Reagan building in an adjoining room. And so 100 lucky people are going to get to actually watch that show live. I've got actually a bribe in to the people guarding the door so that I can slip in and out and catch some moments, because it is going to be a terrific moment. So on that note, let me turn the mic over to Ira. Thank you so much.
I go to General Walsh because the Corps has come up a few times, and I'm very eager because you have incredible influence, I imagine, over what gets done there. Am I giving you too much credit there?
Too much credit, Ira. First, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. And, my presentation is about 40 minutes, but Ira said I have 5, so I'm going to hit my watch, and at the end of 5 minutes, I'll stop wherever I'm at. I've been one of your soldiers for the last 33 years. This is my 3rd Corps of Engineer Division that I've had the pleasure to command. And the Mississippi Valley Division, as Ira just mentioned, covers down from Canada on down to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's 370,000 square miles. From Minnesota down to the Gulf, and I have 6 districts, colonel district commanders that are helping me run this division. But a little bit of history. Prior to coming to this job, I was the commander of the Gulf Region Division. I was General Petraeus' engineer in Iraq, and I was working the infrastructure there. My boss, the chief engineer, said he was going to give me an easy job and move me to the Mississippi Valley Division so I could rest, and then we have 2 hurricanes and 5 floods, and I won't go on to that. But prior to taking command of a division, what I try to do is read the history of where we came from. And so I read the history on the Mississippi River, a lot of the documents that we're talking about. I've read Rising Tide. John Barry, I'm not sure if he's here today. He usually attends these things. Certainly have read Lanterns on the Levees. River we have Rot, which has to do about navigation systems in the northern part and the upper part of the Mississippi. Upon Their Shoulders, which is a history of the Mississippi River Commission. And so while I was reading the history, it's like, okay, so what else am I supposed to do as I look at the history of the Mississippi River? What's the future look like? And as I traveled around the Mississippi River, I would go in the upper part of the Miss, and the people look at the upper part of the Mississippi as a separate entity. I look at the middle Miss. You go into St. Louis, and it's the middle Miss, and you know, we don't care too much about those guys in the upper and the lower. And then, of course, you go into the lower part of the Mississippi, and they just don't recognize that it's connected from one area to another. And so I was trying to figure out how do we define what the future ought to be in all of these sub-water sheds. And so what I started asking folks about is, well, let me put a slide number 34 up, please. And I think Mr. Tripp and probably a few others had showed this as well. When I look at the Mississippi River, the watershed, it's very much as you see on this slide. It's 41%, I believe. Cindy, Regional Director, Fish and Wildlife Service, mentioned that 41% of the United States puts water into the Mississippi into the watershed. 31 states touch the Mississippi River watershed. It's not only the Mississippi River, it's the Ohio, it's the Missouri, and so what you see there is a much larger watershed than what people have in their mind. And so what I was looking for is, what's that document that defines the future of the 3rd largest watershed in the world? As you put these together, that's the 3rd largest watershed in the world. And our nation doesn't have a vision for what we should be looking at on the 3rd largest watershed in the world. And so as I was looking for that future document, I couldn't find one. Now, being a public engineer, I know that it takes 50 years sometimes to get things going. And most of that has to do with science. I'm an engineer, so you guys, most of it has to do with science and policy. But how do we put together a vision that's, next slide please, 35, a 200-year vision? And the reason why I looked at a 200-year vision, because you're going to have to figure out what you want and then build back in 50-year increments on what the future should look like. And you can see on this slide, I have it on the right-hand side, English that I can talk to my mom about, and on the left-hand side, my mom could understand that, and on the right-hand side is Washington, D.C. speak. So I can hit on both sides, but it says the same thing. That we should have an intergenerational commitment that our people should enjoy a quality of life unmatched in the world. We should lead secure lives along all the rivers and the tributaries. We should enjoy fresh air, fauna, and the surrounding areas. I'll let you read the rest of that. And so we're taking that vision around from the Mississippi River Commission. I'm the president designee of that Mississippi River Commission. And we're driving that around and seeing if we can get people to rally around the third largest watershed in the world. And that's why people who have heard my pitch before, I can't control myself in talking about the third largest watershed in the world. And how does that connect with the future and what we should be looking at? And I think that's where we go to. I've got 8 minutes. All right, I'm stopping.
It's all right. No. We'll get back to it because there's a lot of questions. Do you want to answer? Let me begin with you about the question that was raised earlier about what to do with should we cut off the Mississippi? And did you see that slide that was put up earlier today? One of the solutions to the flooding and the restoration was to just chop off the Mississippi at the bottom and redirect it to a different spot. Do you have any? Are you allowed to say anything about that?
Well, I would say part of the requirement of the Mississippi River Commission that started in 1879 was to work navigation on the Mississippi. Right after that, the 28 flood, there was a requirement to put in a flood damage reduction system since 1928 on forward. So one of my missions in the Mississippi River Commission is to maintain navigability and flood risk reduction. Our nation has invested about $13 billion into that navigation system and the flood risk reduction system at about $300 million a piece. Can we look at different ways of navigation? Sure we can. That's not new. And I think as the doctor mentioned, there's a lot of things that just kind of circulate around. It's about 30 years ago, people were saying, well, why don't we just take a little bit past New Orleans and we'll take a hard left and a hard right on the navigation piece. We can do that if that's what people want. As an engineer, I can pretty much build whatever you scientists say I can build.
Yeah. Let me go to some questions from the audience because they actually mirror a lot of mine. And this one is, the views of the future presented did not take into account changes in technology. They all look at the future based on today's technology. How will technological innovations affect the future of the Gulf? Think of robots, genetically modified species, breakthrough energy solutions, like fusion, but also simple things like better skimmers, planning for, if we're going to be living with oil in the Gulf, shouldn't we be planning that a spill is going to happen? We should have better technology to clean it up or to know what the Gulf looked like before it ever happened.
Well, that's right. Bill Riley, as was stated earlier, one of our co-chairs, was administrator of EPA during the Exxon Valdez, and he commented when he got back, he had this duty to do, it like he had been asleep for 20 years, that very little change in the technology to fight and control oil spills. So we have recommendations about doing that. The other thing, I think, though, and then there are many examples, not only in terms of the oil and gas drilling technology that's developed and be able to drill and work in deep water, but everyone saw all of these pictures taken by these ROVs, these robots down there. That was actually technology that was homegrown, developed right there in the Gulf of Mexico, the highest technology now exported around the world. But the other, I think, when we think about the technology, we shouldn't always think about the hard technology, mechanical, electrical technology, because I think if anything, we've learned we've got to use natural technology and have natural systems do a lot of the work to restore and sustain this environment. So I think we have a lot to learn about the forces of nature and how we manage them and how we let them build things and create things that last.
What did you not hear today in all the talks that you would like to, I'll ask this of all the panels, that you would like to have heard talked about today? What was not talked about enough? Well, I mean, we've been speaking for hours here. Just about everything has been covered, but I'll just say one of the recurring themes, and this was talked about at the last panel and the panel before, is the science-based necessity for getting the science right in the Gulf. Why did we not have any information about what the Gulf even looks like before we went in there?
I'll take a first shot at this. The Gulf has been a very productive and a fairly resilient system for decades. So people in general didn't worry about it. I mean, every year it seemed to produce all the same oil, all the same gas, all the same seafood, all the same jobs, all the same everything, all the same wetlands. And it hasn't been until the Gulf now has been challenged. It's been challenged by a series of very severe hurricanes and now an oil spill. And primarily Katrina and this oil spill have focused the attention of the nation onto the Gulf of Mexico and away from the last mudslide in California or the last wildfire somewhere. I mean, we've had two very large disasters in a relatively short period of time in the Gulf of Mexico region, and that has brought a lot of attention to the region, as it should. People in the region have been trying for decades to get basically Congress to pay more attention to the Gulf and to provide more funds to the Gulf region to study and to learn more about the Gulf.
One of the suggestions of somebody in the audience says, shouldn't we make it a requirement of the industry to fund these baseline studies prior to development of new offshore areas?
Yes, indeed, that's one of the recommendations as part of the management plan that we said the industry should support rather than the general taxpayer. That would include support for the environmental studies program, which, by the way, had dwindled on a non-inflation adjusted basis down to a fifth of what it was 15 years ago. And the reason it dwindled is that the demand for the science, which was primarily from the frontier areas where people were concerned about these new risks, dwindled. There was not the demand for it in the Gulf of Mexico. Now I think we have an opportunity to learn the hard way by investing in that science to help us understand this important operating environment.
General Walsh?
I guess what I didn't hear concrete enough is what is the vision of the Gulf Coast in 100 years? If we knew what that was, and I think we could design the science on how to work those particular items. There was a question I think was up here. Can we get it done? And the answer was yes, of course. But what is it? Is what I'm looking for. And when we define what it is, we do a very good job at it. I mean, when we put the Transcontinental Railroad together during the Civil War, it took 6 years. When President Kennedy said go to the moon, we knew what the science was, and we can go to the moon. When the Mississippi River Commission was given the requirement to put flood damage reduction system together, we've done that. When Congress said to build a hurricane storm damage risk reduction system around the city of New Orleans, they gave the Corps $15 billion, and in another 132 days we'll bring that city to the first time above a 100-year level of surge protection. So when you know where you want to go, you can help get there. And so what I didn't hear is what it is.
There's no it in it. It's that, so to paraphrase someone else a while back. Yes, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to actually echo that same frustration. I do think that we're at a really pivotal time now, though, and with the creation of the Gulf of Mexico Restoration Task Force, through work with those of us who are there in the region and are familiar with the programs and plans that have been developed, hopefully we'll craft that vision, and we'll be able to find exactly what it is.
And do we have a plan? We have the money. We talked about there's potential money, and General Walsh has very well put the issue of what the it is, even scientifically speaking. If we want to study the Gulf, is there a plan of what you would study in the Gulf and go step A, B, C, D, and collect this information for what we need? Does a plan like that exist to be funded? Let me ask Dr. Walker first.
Well, for the first time now, through the current administration has created a National Ocean Partnership that's creating again a National Ocean Council. And that council will work with the various regional ocean partnerships around the country, including the Gulf Alliance and the three on the Atlantic, the Pacific coast, and the four on the Atlantic coast, to do just that, to develop a long-range, maybe 100-year vision for the future of that particular great water body. So we have finally headed down that path, and that's something that we didn't hear today, but we're going in the right direction, I do think, at this point.
Don, you agree?
Yeah, I just want to reflect on you asked a question about the science, and you can talk about the science generally for the Gulf of Mexico. But if we focus for the moment on what the last panel talked about, the restoration challenge, everyone who makes a recommendation says that this restoration should be science-based, science-informed, science-supported. But that's easy to say, harder to do. Case in point, Congress authorized in the Water Resources Development Act in 2007 the Louisiana Coastal Area Ecosystem Restoration. General Walsh is in charge of it. That plan calls for a science and technology program. Fact of the matter is, the program has never been fully supported by the federal government and not been supported at all by the state government. So it's a weak, underpowered program. We think about this as a good concept, but when it comes to reality, everyone's an expert. Everyone has his own idea about what restoration works, which is obvious, intuitive, and wrong. And that we need to draw some hard conclusions about what works, is going to work in the long run, as we said, this long-term vision. That requires not only research, but it requires careful assessment of the alternatives, and honest appraisal of the outcomes, and auditing of the outcomes, so we can learn by doing in an adaptive way. That's a challenge for the way government decision makers work, but it's also a challenge for scientists. Left to their own devices, scientists like to pursue their own interest. And so they like to propose to do things that they want to do, and they will bend over backwards to show you that it's relevant to what you want. In reality, we have to think of a new way of doing this, to be able to bring the best science onto the most important critical questions.
Well, let me just focus in on one of those questions, which I mentioned before, and that is sea level rise. General Walsh has shown you that we have to think 200 years in advance. We know the seas are going to be rising in those. It takes 50, 100 years to come up with a plan, as he has pointed out correctly. I don't see a plan anywhere for the next 100 years to combat ocean sea level rise.
You can tell them what you're doing with the sea level rise scenario.
The Corps of Engineers has put out an engineer circular that we now take sea level rise in our planning documents. So when we bring something to Congress, it will have sea level rise at 0, sea level rise at 1 foot, and sea level rise at a meter, 3 feet. And so what we're looking at is how do we work from that particular perspective from a planning point of view. That leads to the questions that we have submitted a report to Congress called LACPR, where we divided the state of Louisiana into 5 different areas, and we did a planning review at a very high level on those 5 different areas. And when you're looking at 3 foot of sea level rise, there's a lot of economic issues. Do you want to have everybody in that area to raise their houses up 3 feet? Do you want everybody to retreat? What do you do with the transportation systems? So there's a lot of planning studies that are out there, but it's tough political decisions to make that people, well, that's 100 years from now, I don't need to worry about that. I don't want to retreat people off of Grand Isle. I don't want to retreat off of this, but those tough political decisions can be made if there's a vision of what that future looks like, and this is what we're going to do, and then move towards that in an increment.
Well, can't you put that in terms that people in this town understand, which is dollars and cents? Can't you say, if you don't do this, you're going to lose, $1 trillion of industry? You talked about the value of the Gulf and the produce that comes out of the Gulf, in billions of dollars. Can't you say, well, this city's going to lose this billions, add them all up, accumulate them, and if you don't act, this is what's going to be lost?
I think that's part of the concern that I have with creating a vision by saying how expensive it is. I don't think they said how expensive is it when we're going to build the Transcontinental Railroad. I don't think the president said this is how much it's going to cost when we go to the moon.
But they all say that now, right? What I'm saying is the counter-argument, if you don't build it, you don't spend the money, it's going to cost you this much more by not acting.
Right. And I don't get grabbed by this is how much it's going to cost.
Right.
We're going to create a vision where the people can, as you can see on my slide, live in a safe area and recreate and all of the other things. I think that captures me more than it's going to cost me $1 billion.
And then this is a question, I guess it's sort of ties in. Do we have enough information to estimate the value of coastal activities and industries around the U.S. now in advance of any disasters? Or are we lacking good coastal economic baselines? Do we know what it's going to... Nobody knows. These are big questions. Maybe are they too big a question for us to handle
We think we know it.
As a society?
We had a panelist earlier who is an economist who gave some estimates and numbers. But one of the things, I think the lesson of the Macondo blowout was how vulnerable that these economies are and how the ripple effect and how far they can extend. So we know this in a proximal sense. We know the seafood harvested, the shipping, but we don't necessarily fully understand the consequences of a big disruption to the tourist economy that occurred throughout the Gulf of Mexico, not only in the areas that saw oil coming to shore, but the areas in Tampa Bay and Florida suffered economic problems because people just didn't come. And then there are people, of course, whose livelihoods depend on those tourists beyond the motel owners and restaurants and so on. So we can quantify the economies, but we don't have a very good handle on their vulnerabilities to disruption.
And it's a question that I guess what do you hope the general public does with the information they're learning today about that sort of question and the oil spill issues, long-term effects, money, yada, yada, yada?
One thing we hope the general public does is get involved in the process. There are going to be a lot of decisions made, and those decisions need to be vetted in the public 100%. So in Mississippi, and I think the same, and I know in Alabama as well, their state commissions that their governors established now have those two reports out for public comment for 30 days. So we hope that the public will get involved, and we hope that the public will find ways to be supportive of the things that their business leaders and their environmentalists and are saying are important things to do. Because without public support, you don't get much movement at the levels such as Congress where the funds can actually come from to implement those kinds of things.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that hopefully folks in this room, if you didn't already, understand the incredible value of this part of our country, and not just for our regional economy, but to the nation.
I'd say, is there a connection from the people in North Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri to the Gulf Coast? And until they recognize that...
Tell us that, because you're an expert on what happens when you farm in the Midwest, what happens down in Louisiana. Well, the connection.
Yes, the connection is through navigation, is how do they get their grain out to the world market. Now, does the farmer in Cedar Rapids or Fargo-Moorhead, they've been fighting floods now for the last 3 years with the heavy snowfalls, and they'll probably go through a heavy flood season again. You've probably seen them putting sandbags protecting their city for the last 2 years. Are they concerned about what's happening to the Gulf Coast? And they should be. Are the people from Louisiana concerned of what's happening up in North Dakota and Iowa and others? They should be. If we don't keep the locks, operating, we're not going to be able to keep navigation going, and people are not going to be able to get their goods to the market. Is there a connection? Yes. It's the third largest watershed in the world.
Well, it's an interesting point because it goes back to what Cindy was saying about all the dead shells as they move down the coast from New England and now enter into the Gulf of Mexico, and the seabeds, these shell beds are devoid of life, and you have to restore them. They're sort of a warning to the people down here. Look what's heading in your way.
That's right, and ironically, those of you who enjoy oysters on the half shell here in Washington, D.C., very likely get your oysters from the coast of Louisiana or the Gulf Coast. So.
There used to be a saying, I remember Shoals Restaurant, I don't know if you've been around 40 years, there used to be Shoals Cafeteria here with the slogan, I'm sure it's the same, the oysters you eat today slept last night in Chesapeake Bay. Not anymore. So, no, they're not anymore either. So are you optimistic about us being able to tackle these big issues? I mean, can you keep them on the radar screen long enough with the political infighting? Can you make this a presidential or an election year topic in 2012? Can you keep this on the radar screen that long?
We have to be optimistic about this. If we're not optimistic, if the people who are sitting up here, and most of you in the audience, don't think we can be successful in this, we're not going to be, because it's going to take a partnership effort involving all of the people in the region, all of the congressional delegations, all of the business communities that operate or benefit from the Gulf. It will, as you say, General, it will take partnerships between the Gulf area and the people in Iowa, which, as you know, there is a partnership there where we had a farmer-farmer exchange, and farmers from up there have come to the Gulf, and farmers from the Gulf have gone to Iowa, looked at how we do business, and put in some programs in place in Iowa that have reduced nutrient output from farms by as much as 70%. So it's a small start, but it is a start. And it's only going to happen through consensus and through partnerships throughout the various regions that we do a better job of taking care of the future of our great water bodies.
Well,
There are two big issues, I think, now that are on the public plate in terms of national public policy that have come out of this bill, and our commission report deals with both of them. One is that, and I'm thinking of the people in Houma, Louisiana are really upset because the government's slowing down drilling, and we want to put people back to work and get more drilling. The people in Destin, Florida, not that far away along the coast, are rallying to keep oil drilling away from their shores. So we have to realize that there are cost and benefits involved here, and that we all, as Americans, need to stand up and say, if we're going to depend on the Gulf of Mexico for this resource, we have to insist through Congress, through elected officials, that it's done safely. Secondly, that there's a realization, I think, because of this, that because of the long-term degradation of this system, most of it, as General Walsh indicated, for navigation, for oil and gas production, they're done in the national interest. And now we have, with this opportunity we have because of these penalty funds, to dedicate this for smart, effective environmental restoration that could transform and make this area more resilient to the future problems, whether the oil and gas development, climate change, sea level rise, and the like.
All right, you got the last word today. General Michael Walsh, Don Bosch, William Walker, and Cindy Brown, thank you all. We'll be talking about this on Friday at Science Friday here right in the building if you want to talk more about it. Thanks for all coming today.